Hello, in this video I'm going to show you about this process of operationalizing your research questions. Now I'm going to show you two blank tables and talk you through each row of the table so that you can get an idea of what the process of operationalizing your research questions is. So first of all, what operationalizing means is taking something from an idea to something that you can actually implement or do. There's a couple of ways that researchers can get off track, and that's why this type of planning your research is really, really important. So a couple of pitfalls to avoid. You want to avoid creating research questions about a certain phenomenon and then not having the data to answer your research questions. And this process prevents that from happening. Also, this helps you walk through a general notion or a research problem or situation that is general and helps you keep narrowing and narrowing and narrowing your ideas down until you are at a way that you can actually collect data to answer those questions. So let's start with row one of this table, your research problem or situation. Here, you're going to write something general, something about a phenomenon that you're noticing. For example, in second language acquisition, one thing you might want to research is the way that interacting with media in English helps somebody's acquisition of English, or hinders it, I guess. That's a very general type of problem or situation. And let's say that's what piques your interest and you want to design a study about that. This should be something that you notice that grabs your attention about, kind of either comes out of the literature that you've been reading or your interactions with the everyday world. In the second row, it says general research objectives. So all the research that we do needs to have a purpose. So here you go from the phenomenon or problem or situation that you see to objectives that you want to accomplish with your research in general. For example, in the example that we're moving through, maybe you want to understand how people's consumption of media in English outside of the classroom can support or help or give them motivation in a certain way, maybe to improve their English language learning inside of classrooms. So maybe your real objective is to help teachers to understand what their students are doing so that they can leverage the things that students are doing outside of class with media into inside of class activities, for example. Then specific research objectives, you want to take that general objective of your research one more level. Maybe you even want to design some kind of in-class activities that where students reflect on their media use or something like that. I'm just kind of making this up here as I go to give you an illustrative example. Then you need to move to research questions. And the step between the research problem and the objectives and the questions is a big one because questions have to be answerable. And there's lots of things that you need to take into consideration when you're designing research questions. You need to consider the amount of time that you have. That's going to constrict, I guess, the amount of, or how your study might be designed. Because if you only have a year to collect your data, or you only have a semester or a month, that's going to affect the types of data and the scope of your study. And that scope needs to be reflected in your research questions. Usually we're looking to create between 1 and 3 research questions. You can have sub-questions, but more than that is probably too big of a research project and needs to be divided into smaller projects. Once you've created your research questions, you need to look at the different methodologies that are available to you to answer those questions. And your methodologies really need to be in line with what the questions actually are. So, for example, if you're interested in finding out how language learning occurs through media use outside of classrooms, there's so many different methodologies you could use. You could use surveys, you could use life histories, you could do case studies of people who report that as their way of learning English. There's many, many different things that you could do, and you need to choose the one that best aligns with your research questions and your objectives. And then finally, the methods. The methods is what you actually do, right? So if you're going to do a life history, for example, of people who say that they have learned English through watching television, then you're going to do in-depth interviews and maybe multiple in-depth interviews. In your methods, you're also going to tell us how you're going to find your participants, how many, and all those details about the actual implementation of your methodology. So as you can see, this very simple chart has all the pieces of your research project in it. And so it's very important to walk through these steps and create this operationalizing your research questions chart. Now, in the next chart, I just want to show you, again, it's a blank chart, but I want to show you kind of a way to check your process. So after you've gone through that operationalizing your research questions table, now I want you to create a table where you put all your research questions and sub-questions in the left column, and each one gets a row. And then I want you in the right-hand column to say the data that you're collecting that answers that question. Now, in the right-hand column, we probably want more than one source of data for each question. That's triangulation, right? That's getting different perspectives on the same phenomenon through different types of data. That doesn't mean one type of data is an experiment and one type of data is an observation. What I mean by the data that answers the question is, like, look at the instruments that you're going to use as part of your methodology. So if you're going to use surveys, if you're going to use interviews, if you're going to use observations, what types of data are you collecting? You've already figured that out. Now I want you to think about how your research questions line up with the data sources that you're planning to collect. And for each question, there needs to be data that answers it, okay? Or something's off. So this should help you kind of make sure that your research questions are in line with the data that you're going to collect, and vice versa. Also, again, remember triangulation. You want more than one type of data giving you answers to each question in general. There may be situations where you have only one type of data answering a question, but in general, you want to just go ahead and use this as a way to double check your alignment between research question and data, and also triangulation.